so.
Right, so the big thing now is to identify underground resources
That's the different,
through remote sensing.
you can do that through vibration.
Yeah, but
They do some stuff with the unified.
but there was some aerial stuff that they
You can,
look for certain patterns that might indicate underground.
sometimes, well, there could be, I'm just reaching back. If you have faults, there may be vegetation patterns.
That's what I was thinking, the vegetation
There
grows.
could be different, you can also
I
do
think that's
elevation shift, because
Right.
it's very slight.
Actually, I guess it's not.
Right.
By just looking at patterns
Good
in
practice.
Right.
It's just the way things are done.
Sometimes the earth is shifting, the vegetation is shifting.
Sure.
And so that could be a way of,
Yes.
but there may be also, certain vegetation, way for certain type of geological formation. Well, that's, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Because lime,
Have motion
a
to.
lot of people are lime,
No, and it's all.
and certain could grow in lime soil, but not another type of soil. So that would be, the vegetation could be an indication
Right.
of the type of substrate.
Mike's up.
Well, I gotta get something, I'll be right back.
Hey, Valerie, how are you? I like your red shirt. Yeah. I got red yesterday, I got a red shirt on.
Did you?
Yeah, red is my favorite color.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. Happy Cinco de Mayo.
That's right.
Did y'all make it down to our festivities?
You know what? I didn't, but
I didn't, but,
we went and had brunch at Farm Messia,
oh, nice.
and we were like, why is there so much? Like, I couldn't figure it out. I was like, why is there so much traffic? That's why, because
That
you
is
were
why.
having. How was it?
It was great.
Good.
Yeah, considering all the events that were going on, we did
Right.
graduation.
How was the food there?
It's
It's one of my favorite places.
Is it?
It is.
Somebody else I know went.
It's one of my favorite places.
Pharmacy.
And my stepdaughter is celiac, so it's gluten free, and they have so many options.
Oh my God, how nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I've never been, it being so close.
They have a great lunch menu
Oh,
and
yeah,
lunch
it's
menu.
so healthy and all, they're having all this unhealthy stuff, all that.
All the undies.
Yeah, and that is. Yep. The posta.
Exactly.
Tortillas.
No, it's you should check it out.
Oh, yes, definitely. I will. I feel like a little writer up here.
Hey, Andrew.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, good, good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Good to see you.
I guess, huh? It's like I have to leave here by 2.
I actually
So bring one over.
maybe you guys
Get one and roll it.
but
I
I meet with him next week, so I will.
I have not been told anything by anybody, not been given any instruction changes, so. It's the whole thing ridiculous, but.
No, I just think he's dreaming. So
Well, yeah, I probably just better do it.
yeah. Thank you.
Sure. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I just had lunch with Connie, so.
Did you really? How's she doing? She's doing good.
Yeah. She had one and she has another one next week, I think. No, it seems like it went fine and her brother keeps coming to take her around, so yeah.
I'm so glad. Good, good, good.
Man.
I also need to be back.
I need to leave at 1:30.
Let's make this happen then.
Oh, I thought we were taking bids.
All right, 1:30 it is.
No, but you can't have an extra.
I did.
Oh, there's no one. I brought two and I left them both in my car.
Trying to find my way today.
Oh, yeah, I guess that is correct on every single front. Yeah, you're the only one who can, but yeah. You are the chair and you are Manuel A. Sanchez. And this is your seat.
This is our second to last meeting here at the county, so.
That is correct. That is correct.
We have one next month, we have a date, we have July off, and then back to the city.
We do not have June off. We have July off. At least that's the plan. I'll do my best to remind everyone.
It worked for Hey, Andrew, did you happen to have an extra feedback of the agenda?
Agenda, yes.
That I can just use the scroll notes on?
I word real good. Yeah, I word gooder. But anyway, we may get started. Well, actually, this clock is not saying 1 yet, so maybe we better defer to that one. I have no idea. I'll vouch in a court of law that it was past 1 o'clock when you call, if you want to call to order now.
1:02. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. It's 1:02 p.m. on May 11th, 2022. And we call this meeting of the MPO Planning Policy Board to order. If you all would rise with me and recite the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. If we can get a roll call, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Councilor Corrin,
Present.
Councilor Bencomo,
Present.
Mayor Barasa,
Here.
Mr. Doolittle,
Here.
Mr. Chair.
Present.
Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
All righty, thank you so much, Andrew. All right, want to ensure that, is there any member of the board that has any known or perceived conflict of interest with any item on the agenda? If I can get a yes or a no, please, from the board.
No.
None.
No.
No.
Very good, thank you. All right, then we'll move on to agenda item number 4, which is public comment. Are there members of the public that are here for public comment? All righty. All right, then we'll move on to agenda item number 5, which is approval of our agenda. If I can get a motion and a second for approval. Actually,
We have
before
some
do,
changes,
thank you.
Mr. Chair. Yes, please, before we have a motion. Staff wants to request the policy board change the agenda to allow our guests from Nmdot to present. We request that agenda item 8.1 be moved to be between agenda items 7.1 and 7.2. So our proposed order will be 7.1, 8.1, 7.2, and then on from there.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. So Can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Well, we will now take 8.1 after 7.1.
Move to approve.
We have a motion by Councilor Bencomo.
Nora
Seconded, Corn.
Barasa, second.
I heard Councilor Coran first. Thank you, Mayor. So we have a motion and a second for the approval of the agenda. If there's no other comments, can I ask for a roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Counselor Corn?
Yes.
Counselor Bencomo?
Yes.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Mr. Doolittle?
Yes.
Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Oh, sorry, yes, I forgot my microphone was off. Thank you, Andrew. All right, then we'll move on to agenda item number 6, which is the approval of our minutes, the minutes from the meeting of April 13th, 2022. Were there any
Mr. Chair,
comments?
staff regrets to admit that we made an error in the minutes. We actually have the February date listed on the minutes. The correct date should be April 13th, so we need to have a motion with an amendment to make that change.
Okay, so if I can get a motion to approve the minutes as amended or by Andrew?
Move to approve.
There's a motion by Councilor Bencomo.
Nora Barasa, second.
Thank you. Mayor, second was by Mayor Barraza. Are there any other comments, questions on the minutes? All right, hearing none. If I can get a roll call on the minutes from April 13th, 2022 as amended.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Counselor Corn?
Yes.
Counselor Bencomo?
Yes.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Mr. Doolittle?
Yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Very good. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to action items. Agenda item 7.1, which is Resolution 22-03, a resolution appointing a member to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Facilities Advisory Committee. If I can get a motion and a second to begin the discussion, please.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion, we approve Resolution 22-03.
Thank you. We have a motion by Mayor Barraza
Second.
and a second by Councilor Curran. All righty. Andrew?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. One of the members of the BPAC who was previously with us, Ms. Donna Devine, tendered her resignation earlier this year. As a result, the MPO staff opened an open call for candidates for the position. That open call for candidates lasted from April I don't remember, but it was in the single digits, all the way up until May the 2nd. We received three submissions or applications. Those applications are in your packet. I do need to let the committee know that Mr. Aguirre notified me this morning that he was withdrawing his candidacy, so we still have Mr. Wilcox and Mr. Kaiser on the floor for consideration this afternoon. We have Mr. Wilcox with us, and I would like to invite him up to speak at this time.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm here, I guess, to answer any questions you may have. I'm assuming everybody has my cover letter and my resume. I have it here, an extra one in case you need it. Do you have any questions of me? Is there anything that you think I should know about this position that maybe I don't know already?
I don't know. Are there any questions at this time by the board for Mr. Wilcox?
Mr. Chair,
Mayor Barraza?
my only question is, why would you want to serve on this committee?
Well, as you look at my resume, you can see that I've been very active in community service for quite a while, and I've already gotten stepped myself into a lot of activities already, and I think it's really important for people to give back to their community. Even though I am oriented primarily towards active transportation in cycling, I'm also very interested in walking as a form of transportation. When I was the director of Lane County, Bike Lane County, we involved America Walks in some of our activities. And I think that this town has a lot of potential for developing a lot of its walkability. As you may know, there's a walkability index that is out there. And when I moved here, that's one of the things that I looked at. And it meant that I ended up more downtown. And I'm really glad I'm exactly halfway between the downtown plaza and Mesilla.
Oh, nice.
Can't beat that.
No. Thank you, Mr. Wilcox.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Barraza.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Doolittle.
just a couple of questions, I guess. Do you bike or walk for pleasure or for punishment such as tours, marathons? What's your interest in
Actually,
those two?
and it was interesting, I don't remember this gentleman's name. He congratulated me on cycling out here today, and it really wasn't that far. I think you can ride for punishment in Las Cruces in the summer. And, you know, I actually started out my cycling when I was in college, and then I rode across the United States when I was 21. And I got into it for a while, and then I ended up running for 20-some years, 30 years, jogging, running, and then I got back into it. So I was a commuter primarily. That's my thing. You know, there's a lot of road riders out there. You can't put cyclists all in one box or the other, but I still enjoyed some touring, and I'm trying to figure out the touring aspects here in this area. Been modifying my bike so that I can go longer trips and stay overnight, but I'm more of a utilitarian cyclist. So that's why I've taken some steps to make sure that I can ride to grocery shopping and things like that. And I don't want to get into it, but I'm an advocate of short distance trips by bike or walking really save a lot in your car.
Very good, thank you. Part of the reason, just so you know, part of the reason I was asking is this, this board is very active working on a multi-use path system, those kinds of things. And I live in the South Valley, so I see a lot of people who ride the ditches, but I also have a lot of, I would say, tour bicyclists because they're in the fancy gear and they're riding long miles. And so I was just kind of curious what your interests are.
Right,
So I
well,
appreciate the response.
That's interesting. There is a group called Warm Showers, and you can open up your home to people who are traveling through the area. It's like an Airbnb, but there's no charge. And so I haven't set that up yet. I'm still kind of figuring out whether that's something I want to get into. It depends on how much, I hate to turn people down, you know, but yeah, you can open up your house to warm showers, and then you get these great stories from people that come to stay with you.
Well, if you're ever interested, we work with the Tour of the Gila there in Silver City. Lance Armstrong was part of that many years ago. So if you're interested, I can certainly get you set up for some more punishment in those
Yeah,
long tours.
well, and I am, frankly, I am recovering from an injury I had. It's taken quite a while. A friend of mine gave me his bike. He had died from prostate cancer, and he was my cycling best friend. And when I got his bike, I went too far, and it didn't fit me right, and it caused an injury, and I'm starting to get back into it. I'm up to about 50 miles a week.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Doolittle. Are there any other questions for Mr. Wilcox? I just had one, and I was curious, how do you anticipate your previous experience in Oregon, I guess, bringing that to the BPAC, and how do you see that as being an asset? I know obviously there's a different culture in terms of writing and stuff, and I know we're still on, I think as Mr. Doolittle had noted, we made a lot of progress within here in the local area, but how would you see that experience and bringing that and being able to use that to help advocate for bicyclists, pedestrians within the MPO area?
Sure. Well, I've come here and I've retired, but I'm still pretty busy with things. And I already thought about that question, and I think about that quite a bit. You got to recognize the culture that's here, and wherever you go, it is a car culture, and you can't be anti-car. It's just not going to get anybody anywhere. But also, I need to let you know that Eugene is not real as far as cycling acceptance in our country. It's way out there. It's often known as kind of like hippies and 60s and 70s. And I think Las Cruces is more real America with a wide diversity of people. And I think there's one really strong opportunity here. If you look at cycling like in Spain, it's really popular. And if we can connect the cultural bedrock of this community with cycling is a really cool thing. I think we have a lot of opportunity to make that happen. So my approach is to take a low profile position, stand your ground, of course, but be professional when you're advocating for things. But I also think you have to recognize the existing culture you're in and where you are and where you go. There's two aspects to that. There's one is what I call incrementalism, where you keep making improvements in other areas of the system, and then there's policy change. Policy change usually means you get more happening in a quicker time, but it can be more political. So it's very important to stay out of those political fights and keep moving ahead with incremental change and hope for the best with policy change.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Any other questions?
Okay, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. We also do have another candidate, Mr. Kaiser. Is Mr. Kaiser here with us? It does not appear that Mr. Kaiser is here with us today, but we do have another candidate. Just to, I'm not going to advocate for that candidate because you can read his letter in there. That's not my role. So, read the letter from him. I do need to give the policy board a little bit of background as to how this particular type of appointment has been handled in the past. We had in the past utilized a ballot when we had multiple BPAC candidates. We were smacked hardly on the hand by CLC Legal for doing that. So we are going to have to utilize a voice vote for this particular vote. So when we do the roll call, you're going to have to state out loud for the record your preferred candidate for the position. I know that that's awkward, but this is the only way that we were able to come to terms with legal about how an appointment like this would be acceptable, because the alternative would be we'd have to have a series of up or down votes, yay or nay, as to whether to accept, and you're by default prejudicing the vote in favor of the first candidate called, so we don't want to do that. So that's how this particular vote is going to have to go and how it will have to be handled going forward.
Okay. And I think it's a concern that we don't have on record how we're voting. Or...
That was the concern that CLC Legal had. Now, I will say in our defense that we had put it into the record and we read out the votes when we had them. But unfortunately, that just did not pass muster with CLC Legal. And since they're our attorneys, that's how we're going to have to proceed.
And my smile comes from the fact of that I know that's exactly how we do it in the county is we read them into the record so that it's noted what we do, but then, but anyways, okay. So then I guess then we will have a choice for the policy board to choose between Mr. Kaiser and Mr. Wilcox. So I guess I don't know if there's any questions on the process put in the board before we start. Council.
Sorry, Chair. I didn't have a question, but I did just want to speak. I know Scott Kaiser as well, and in my sort of working through running for office and thinking about pedestrian safety and cyclist safety, he actually gave me a very big walking tour of our area in the East Mesa. And so I do just want to speak to his, I also think that his credentials are substantial in terms of folks who might do it. But I really appreciate Mr. Wilcox being here today. And so I just want to speak to Scott's sort of validity as a candidate among these folks as well. So.
Thank you, Councilor. Okay. Is there any other input, questions on the board? All right. Hearing none, so I think when we do a roll call,
Yes, Mr. Chair.
We'll ask that either it's a vote for either Mr. Kaiser or Mr. Wilcox.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Councilor Corrin?
Mr. Wilcox, please.
Councilor Bencomo?
Mr. Wilcox.
Mayor Barraza?
Mr. Wilcox.
Mr. Doolittle?
Mr. Wilcox?
Mr. Chair.
And Mr. Wilcox.
And staff congratulates Mr. Wilcox. He is now appointed to the BPAC, and we will get him the information and bring him on board.
Very good. Thank you. Congratulations, sir. Thank you for coming.
Congratulations.
And if you wouldn't mind, we'll have to get you on the microphones for the record.
It's kind of awkward in a way, actually. I didn't know who the other candidate was, and I actually know Scott Kaiser. He's a great guy. So what I will do is have him bend his ear, have him bend my ear, okay? So I want to make sure he has some, it's not going to influence how I make a decision, but I want to get all the information he has. He's new from back east, and he was actually one of my renters in my rental. So he's a great guy. But I appreciate the unanimous decision. That's just really, it's really heartening to me that would be that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. All right, well then, we'll move on to agenda item 8.1, which is our Nmdot safety data presentation.
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is Andrew Ray. For the record, we are very pleased to have with us Mr. Franklin Garcia from Nmdot to give this presentation.
Good afternoon, Mr. Garcia. Appreciate you coming down. I know we've been trying to coordinate this for a while, so really excited to have you here and having you present to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Apologize, Mr. Chair, we've got the wrong PowerPoint up. I believe Mr. Loya is going back to make sure that we get the correct one.
Okay.
So as we're waiting for the presentation to come up, just some introductions. Again, my name is Franklin Garcia. I'm with the New Mexico Department of Transportation. I'm the modal director. So under our
Ask the chair.
Saw Mr. Allen's, Commissioner Allen's out there, and I thought, isn't he on our committee? If he would come on, yes.
I wasn't, I couldn't remember if it was Commissioner Allens or still Commissioner Chaparro and Commissioner Murillo.
Okay.
So I apologize. I wasn't sure, like I said, when I saw Commissioner Allens come in. Sorry about that, Commissioner Allens.
That's all right. I thought it was at 1:30. I thought I was early.
You're here just in time. All right, sorry about that, Mr. Garcia.
no problem, Mr. Chair and council members. Again, Franklin Garcia, modal director under the New Mexico Department of Transportation. Our modal division includes our aviation, transit and rail, our ports of entry, and also our traffic safety division. And our traffic safety division actually houses our traffic records section. With me today also is our traffic safety director, Jeff Varela. As you guys know, Trent, he's well-versed in everything DOT. However, the traffic records program is an area that's housed in Santa Fe. So that's an area I know that we've been coordinating with Trent and Mr. Ray on trying to get a presentation here. We apologize for not being able to come down. We had some other conflicts. One of them was actually a traffic records assessment that's done through our federal partners. And so our lead person that would present it actually had to chair that traffic records assessment. She actually was planning on coming down here. Unfortunately, she got COVID and she had actually been in the hospital a couple times. I didn't want to miss another opportunity to have this presentation. So I've worked in the traffic safety area for several years, since 1999. So I've been working with this program. I don't do the hands-on piece of it, but I'm versed enough. Jeff and I are versed enough. I think if we get into too many technical questions, I may have to defer and get some information back to you, but I think we can give you a pretty good idea about where we're coming from and what we're doing. So talking about our Nmdot traffic records program, the term that you're going to be hearing a lot is the UCR, or the Uniform Crash Report. And so this is the report that actually is submitted by the law enforcement agencies. It's a standard report that we actually generate, and we actually generate each report individually. And that report is presented by law enforcement and then submitted to us for processing. So the Nmdot, what we do with that Uniform Crash Report, the first thing we have to do is we have to date stamp it to show when we got it. And we are receiving these items through email, through FTP. What was that? Yeah, so a file transfer. And also we still get mail. The post office says mail never stops. Well, actually, we still do get hard copy mail items sent to us. We do have staff. We do have partners at our University of New Mexico that do have to read the reports. Some are handwritten, some are typed. And look for any missing information. Is there a name? Is there a last name not put in the box? Look for different missing information. I could get into some of that. We also have to make sure each report has a specific Nmdot UCR number, Uniform Crash Report number. So they're all numbered. So it's not just a photocopied item that they just keep running. We actually have a specific number so we could track that individually. Then we enter that into our UCR tracking sheet so we can find that report when we need it. We have to separate the UCRs. Of course, the first thing the feds need, the first thing people want to know is mainly on fatals. And so if there's a fatal crash, it's a K crash, we are required to, one, get that early notification through our law enforcement partners, and we get that through NIBRS or whatever system they use to actually tell us there was a fatal crash on this day. So we know we don't have the report, but we know there was a fatal. So we can get that information and start uploading it into our federal FARS. So it's a fatal analysis reporting system that we have to enter some crash data. Also, anything involving a commercial motor vehicle, the federal motor carriers, FMCSA, does definitely want to know when there's a crash involving commercial motor vehicle. If there's a damage to our guardrail or damage to some DOT property, we have to get that information and send it to our DOT Inspector General to do an investigation to see if we can recoup any money for any damage to any DOT property. And then also the state statute says that the report has to be submitted and be registered for anything above property damage over 500. So anything under 500 does not meet our threshold. And in fact, we've been going to the legislature, we've been trying to get that threshold up to 1,000 because there's so many things that right now you hit, if you have your bumper that you get, at a fender bender, that bumper is going to cost more than $500. We know the bumpers are upwards of 1,000 plus. So if we could just eliminate the $500 and go to a higher threshold, we would have a better picture of actually the type of property damage crash that we'd be dealing with. We have to get all these reports. We have to scan them all, whether they're handwritten or if they're not sent in electronically. And also we partner with our University of New Mexico. And so the DOT has to house all these items. So some items are actually sent through UNM. So we have to house them at the DOT. And then the items that were sent electronically go through the same process, just through a secured transfer site, data site. So next on the slide, it's difficult to see, but I think if you look closely or maybe you zoom in, that's a sample of an Illinois crash report. So it's going to be similar to what really any state agency, any state will utilize for a crash report. A lot of times it's capturing the same data, driver, passenger, seatbelt usage, things like that. We didn't want to put a New Mexico item because of confidentiality. I didn't want to put an item up there and have everything redacted. But that gives you an example of the type of information. This Illinois item is actually handwritten, and we do still see those handwritten items. So once we get a hard copy, let's say we do get a hard copy, or if it is submitted electronically, we have to print it. So we get about a box or a box and a half per month delivered to DOT and through our partners at UNM. Each box has about 600 reports. And then there's about 2 to 3 data transfers, and there's about 400 for reports per delivery. Then what we have to do is we have to sort out and document the items, and that takes about 3 days for the DOT staff, for the UNM staff to go through that and sort those out. Like I mentioned, fatality, commercial motor vehicle, and things like that. Then we have to scan the data. Once we get it, you'll look for image quality. You saw the previous slide. There was some handwriting. So can you read the handwriting? Is there a name that you can't tell? Is the spelling incorrect? Is it a poor photocopy of the item? Is it blurred? Is it skewed? Sometimes when they scan items, maybe it doesn't come across. Maybe they only did one side of a three-page report. Maybe the narrative was cut off, so things like that. And if the report isn't complete, then our partners at UNM will send that back to us, and we'll reach out to the law enforcement agency and hopefully find that officer that wrote the report and say, hey, can you complete this report? We're missing some critical information. We don't have it says there was 3 passengers and there's only 2 listed. So we need to know how many people were injured in that crash, or how many people were involved in that crash. Or maybe the vehicle model was a Mazda 626 and it says Mazda hybrid. And it's like, well, we don't know what that means. So we need to know the vehicle type, things like that. So we have to go back and try to get that. So if we send it back to the law enforcement agency, no fault of law enforcement, but of course, a lot of times you have to track down the officer. He has to find the time. Maybe he has to go back and read his own notes. It might take 2 to 3 months for them to get back the information to us. So a lot of this, and you'll see the theme going through this, is it's not our report. The UCR is generated by the law enforcement agency that is actually involved in tracking the crash. Or if it's an individual that went into a police substation and says, hey, there was a fender bender, they told me just to write my own report, I want to get the form and fill it out. So we are relying, we're not the ones writing the report. The majority are law enforcement officers that are actually writing those reports. And then we do have the UNM students. We do utilize UNM students as the people that are doing a lot of the processing besides our existing staff. We do have some year-round staff at UNM, but we do fund UNM to do the data, hard copy data entry. So, students, they work about 20 hours a week unless there's finals, unless there's other things or other academic needs. But we do get students on board. And so a lot of times they'll work for 4 years there just in that one traffic records area. And then also one of the other challenges is there's, law enforcement agencies all around the state. Some are better at getting their reports in. Some just have a different process for getting crash reports over to us. And we still have some that decide at the end of the year, oh yeah, weren't we supposed to do something with all these reports? And then we get an end of the year backlog of reports that we're getting in. So, between all the time that we're trying to get all these reports, we're relying on law enforcement to get them into us. One of our bigger agencies, of course, New Mexico State Police and also APD. We want to get as many of those reports because they process the majority of the reports for the state. So if we get the majority of those, of course, we want to get those numbers. But at the substations, we do have people that go in and say, hey, I had a fender bender. And so people go in and they work on getting their own reports, as some of you may have had to do yourself if there's been a crash and it's on a private property and things like that. So they want to get the report for their insurance needs. So they could go in and get some of those station reports. The challenge with that is they're not law enforcement, so they fill out the parts that they think they need. So if that rises above the $500 threshold, then we have to go work on trying to get that missing information. So one of the things that we've worked on trying to improve all these systems is we worked on some other states. Iowa started this TRAX model. It's a traffic and citation system. So it's an electronic data transfer process. And so what we're trying to do is we want the law enforcement agencies, the LEAs, as you see up there, we want as many of them using this TRAX system to try to populate the forms roadside and then submit the items electronically. So we do have about 48 agencies that are utilizing this TRAX system. So that helps us with the data delivery, data improvement, and getting the reports out. However, there's probably close to 100 law enforcement agencies statewide. Logan PDs, small municipalities have smaller agencies. And so there's an issue with utilizing the web, getting the information sent electronically and things like that, because Wi-Fi in certain areas, when you're in these rural areas, as you guys know, they could upload the item and it won't deliver until maybe they get closer to town or closer to their substation. So there are some challenges with that in New Mexico with getting that TRAX delivery. And then I'll also get into some of the other challenges and why 100% of agencies aren't utilizing that. So the other challenge that we have, and I know a lot of people want to know, hey, where was that crash? And so geocoding is, an area that we would like to really improve on. But a lot of times it's a challenge because some of the rural areas, around, I'm from Santa Fe, and you go to some of the neighbor communities and it's like, well, you're at the corner of, Alta Vista, but there's no zip code there. And so you have to rely on certain points, like 1 block from the Taco Bell is how we describe where my office is, because we actually don't have a zip code or an address. So things like that we want to get the geocoding. And so we want to either incorporate Google Maps or things like that, but that takes a challenge making sure everyone has the access to that. If we did have that improved, you can get those XY coordinates and really know exactly where it is. But a lot of times it's at the corner of Manal and Candelaria in Albuquerque, let's say. So, but it's not always that simple. It's not always on a grid. So, it could be on a side street. It could be on a dirt road a few blocks off or something. Even in an arroyo, how do you cite that, if the car ran off the road? So geocoding could definitely help us get some more specific data. But the officers work and are trained to get it as close to the location as possible that we can go back and identify. And as I mentioned before, we have those interns, we have the DOT staff, we have the UNM staff that have to do the data cleaning. So they're looking for missing or invalid data. So what we're looking for is if they entered a different code. So there's different codes law enforcement use. Like I said, K would be a fatal crash. An A or a B crash is an injury crash. And so if they inadvertently put a K when it was really just a serious injury crash, we need to find out, like, hey, it says the person was taken to the hospital in the narrative. However, you said it was a K crash. Well, were they picked up by OMI or taken to the hospital? So things like that we have to do the data cleaning. Some of the items, and of course we have, our pedestrian advocates, our bicycle advocates. There's a lot of information that comes from this report, and a lot of people want to know information from each report. So one, I talked about the fatals. We have the FARs up there, reconciliation. That's our fatal analysis reporting. So of course, our federal partners, we want to know exactly all the fatalities in your state. And that's a lot of times how we're graded and how we're tracked and how we receive funding. We also want to make sure with the cleaning, make sure there's no duplicates. Like I said, maybe they put the same driver on both cars inadvertently, things like that. But the things that we want to know is what kind of car was it? What was the body style? If it was a motorcycle crash, was it a motorcycle off the road, or did it involve another vehicle? Was there helmet usage? Was there seatbelt usage? Was it a hit and run? And so did someone leave the scene? For law enforcement, was it during a high-speed pursuit? If it was a DWI, we want to know the DWI information. Did they blow? What was their BAC level? If there's alcohol involved, we have a different DWI crash report that we have to use. We also want the EMS data. EMS wants our data. Ambulance, fire, emergency rescue, were they transported, helicoptered, taken in an ambulance? Pedestrian and bicyclists, was it in a crosswalk? Were they hit by a vehicle? Did they run off the road? So we want to know the vehicle make. We want to know the crash date, if that information is incorrect. And they put 2021, and we're like, well, wait a minute, I think you meant to say 2022, but at the change of the year, a lot of times that happens. You have the wrong crash year. So a lot of times motorcycles and ATVs get mixed. There's a lot more people driving ATVs off roads, and then they come onto a road. For DOT purposes, for other purposes, was it in a work zone where it was, speeding in the work zone? BAC, the breath alcohol concentration. Was an animal involved even? Did they run into an animal? Did they swerve to miss an animal? Or was there a drug-involved incident? So we have to get this information from the crash report and put it in a usable format for as many people that want to get it and use it. So the number of crash reports we're receiving fluctuates between 50 and 70,000, let's say. If you look in that first one, says hard copy not reportable. That's where I said anything less than 500. We would have received that, but we have to take those out. The hard copy reportable, anything above 500 or that was on a New Mexico road. And then the tracks items you see, we do get a large percentage of our items through that electronic data transfer. So things that we've been working on and we've improved on, we've worked with the motor vehicle division. So law enforcement now, if they can scan the back of your driver's license, has a barcode. If the police officer scans the back of that barcode, it would automatically populate that tracks program, so they don't have to go. If they have several citations, it'll populate on the citations. If they have 3 citations, speeding, no seatbelt, and aggressive driving, and they're going to write 3 citations, that scanning the barcode would populate all 3 of those, so the officer doesn't have to sit there. One, it's a safety issue. The officer doesn't have to sit and manually write these on the side of the road. And so 2, it also helps to get the exact information, so there's no misspelling of Michelle with 1 L, Mark with a C, Mark with a K. So that definitely helps law enforcement with that, using that barcode, and that was a big move for us and for UNM to partner with us, not UNM, MVD, I'm sorry, to partner with us to get that information directly onto the citation. That's the entities that are using tracks. And then there's also a citation, the data transfer, and I'll show you a really interesting slide, merry-go-round looking slide that shows where some of the electronic transfers are going and how we're doing it. So this next slide, in the middle it says DPS Model Server, and really the model program that we would want is to have one server that gets all the data, and then we would have one entity that would then get the data to the courts, get the data to MVD, get the data to DOT, get the data to the AOC, and send it all out. The challenge was that we're trying to build this after all these servers have already been established. AOC already has their server. MVD already has their database. DOT, we generated our own database. The challenge is, and a lot of you guys may know, if you create a new IT program, a new information technology system, who's going to own the data? Who wants to be the holder of all that crash information, all that driver information? And so it's been a challenge because no one says who should own all the data. MVD, of course, wants the driver data. They want to know who got the citation. They want to know about the driver. DOT wants to know about the crashes and locations, and we get stuck with the driver data. So now we have to hold the driver data and follow the MVD rules, follow the state rules for privacy issues. AOC wants to know what happened with the driver, if they got cited and they go to court, and did they meet their requirements. They may not necessarily care about how many crashes there were on the road. They want to know what happened with that driver. So it's trying to say, well, we think we should get all the data. AOC said, we don't think we should give you all the court data. I don't think that's anything that you need. MVD says, I'm not sure if you need all the driver data and that driver history. So we have to have working relationships with all of them, and we do have agreements with them to be able to get the data back and forth, but we have to follow their procedures and policies on what we do with it and how we maintain it securely. So that's been one of the challenges, to try to get these different systems talking to each other. And so if you know, creating an IT system is expensive. So we have put several millions of dollars just to get that DPS server to send us to our crash, and then also send some of it to the courts. So we were able to get those two linked. Now trying to get the back and forth between all these with MVD, that's more of a challenge, more of a financial challenge. So some of the reasons for crash delays. So I know the question was, well, why are we getting, it's 2022 and we're still looking at 2020 data? Well, there's delays in, like I said, in agencies getting us the information, and we're not faulting law enforcement. We know they're pulled in a lot of different directions. And a lot of times they have specific officers that handle, traffic control, traffic units. And so they have their own internal processes for getting that out. When we've talked to them, they said, well, we have one sergeant, one captain that likes to get all the reports, and if they're wrong, they'd like to send them back to the officer and say, you fix this before I send it. I'm not signing off on it. So there's some checks and balances there. So I think a lot of that is they want to send as best clean data as they can, and whatever time they have to do those cleanups on their own, that tends to lead to some delays. And like I said, we are getting some agencies that are a little slower at getting to us, and when we get that, we try to call. And the challenge is a lot of times there could be issues with officer turnover. We do get advocates within agencies that say, "Man, we really love this track system. We really like it," and so they become real big advocates. Then they get recruited to go work for state police, and Doña Ana loses an officer that was the biggest advocate, and then they takes all that institutional knowledge. So some of those things are some of the challenges. Also, when there's missing data, about 65% of crash reports were missing coordinates in 2020. And like I said, that geocoding issue also comes up. So we're trying to clean up that because we want to know as close as we can, where was the crash and what can we do about that crash? Was it a missing guardrail? Can we put some uniform median cable barriers that could help run off the road crashes? Things like that help DOT plan, that help other entities, help municipalities, help cities. Also, people that use the track system also, they do have to submit those items. So they could enter into the tracks, but if they don't hit the timely submission, a lot of times we see, oh shoot, I thought I sent you all those, and they have a bunch pending in the system, and so we have to remind them, no, we haven't received the 400 reports that you said you did. So right now we have 58 agencies using the track system. So some of the issues with track system, I said, why don't we have 100%? One is it's not a state mandate. We can't force the agencies to use the track system. We can do our best to advocate for it. We know we have Doña Ana, we have Las Cruces on board, we have New Mexico State University on board, we have Alamogordo on board with tracks, and we do have a lot of good positive feedback. When the officers use it, they'll go tell other agencies, they're all, man, I hate writing all of these reports. officers tell other officers often at trainings, see if you get this tracks program. It populates it for you. You do all this. You don't have to handwrite things. So we do get by word of mouth saying, hey, tell me about this track. So we do get people approaching us saying, I heard there's this system that could help us improve our timeliness and our reporting and reduce the amount of time on the roadway. And so, so we can't mandate it. It's not a state mandate that everyone must use tracks. Some agencies, like I said, have tracks, and then it takes a while for them to get those sent in. Also, I talked about that change in staff where an agency maybe has a big advocate, they go somewhere else, and then you have a little backslide where people are like, you know what, I never liked this automated process. I like the old school way. I'm old school. And so we still see that. You know, not everyone embraces technology. I'm not the best IT guy, so I always have to have someone come help me. So there's still those old time people that like to do things the hard way. You know, I tend to print up all my reports because I like to read them instead of reading them off the computer, things like that. The other problem is funding. So agencies approach us and say, we would love to have all of our officers equipped with the unit in the vehicle that has the barcode scanner, has all those items, has the track software loaded into the computer software and things like that. And then there's also the maintenance issue, not just a one-time purchase. There's a constant maintenance and upkeep of that track system, but smaller agencies don't have that budget to do it. There's not a funding stream that we have that we can give. At some point in the past, probably about 10 years ago when I was earlier with traffic safety, we did have a pot of money, and we said we're going to try to get as much equipment into the officers that we can. So we tried to equip state police and larger agencies getting on board first, because if we can get those larger agencies on board first, we'll get the majority of the crash reports that we need. So why is DOT involved? And why am I up here talking about uniform crash reports when we're not the ones actually generating the crash report? But in the middle of that state statute, it says each officer within 24 hours after completing the crash investigation must forward the written report of the accident to the mode of transportation of the DOT, and above that has to send the written report to the Department of Transportation. So we are the entity that gets all the uniform crash reports from every law enforcement agency in the state pursuant to that statute. There's a whole separate statute that tells us we also have to take that data and put it in a usable annual format. And so I do have some examples of some of the clean reports that we can give you. You want to know time of day, when's the worst time to drive into Mexico, time of day, number of crashes per year, number of crashes on different holidays that you want to know. Hey, how many crashes are at Christmas, at Labor Day, at St. Patrick's Day? Things like that, that people tend to wonder, hey, why are you guys doing a big law enforcement push for St. Patrick's Day? Well, because that tends to be a heavy drinking day, and we want to, we see a lot of fatalities on certain days like that. New Year's Eve, we track that. Time of day of crashes, things like that. So we see those peaks, 7 in the morning to 9, 3 to 5, 5 to 7. Kids are getting picked up from school, going home from school, more cars on the road, people going to work, people leaving work, things like that, that we can look for that data and look for that time. One of the things I talked about our federal partners, we have to enter into this FAR system, Fatality Analysis Reporting System. And so we are graded. Every state is graded based on this FARS process. And so looking at our 2021, we're in the green down at the bottom. It says, did we meet our goal? And it says green, yes. On our completeness, did we meet our goal? Yes. On our overall case quality, did we meet our goal? Yes, for the number of fatal crashes. So if we weren't timely in that, in the past, I could tell you we've been in the yellow. I think there's some areas that maybe we've been in the red. So states are graded, and you could pull this up, see what each state, where they're at and what improvements they could make. So at this point, we are in good standing and green standing with our federal partners. So I know there's some question. We work with the MPOs in El Paso, and there's some discussion about maybe some areas, some states have more timely data. And we'll admit, I think Iowa might have the most timely data because they've implemented the tracks and they've put a lot of investment and money into that program. And so I would say probably Iowa probably has some more timely data than other states. We are probably ahead of some other states that maybe don't put the infrastructure money to that or put the same amount of weight into that type of model. The one thing I think when you look at the Texas, their crash reporting system, it's not called TRAX, it's called Crash. It highlights that it's at no cost to the agencies. So we do provide training for our officers how to complete the reports. They get the training at the academy how to complete a crash report. They actually sit there and actually write them in the police academy. But then we have to do training when they take on tracks. We have to do training when we change the format, say, hey, we added a new box for pedestrian. We want to get more pedestrian data. So we had to update that and remind everyone and tell them this is what we need. So I think what's happening is some of these areas might have put more funding to it. Other states might have more funding that they can put towards it. Right now, New Mexico, we probably put close to $2 million to maintain the system that we currently have, to keep all the data coming through that we currently have. If we found another funding stream, could we do a lot more improvements? Absolutely. We could help those smaller agencies get the equipment they need. And so with that, I think, I'll stand for questions. I think there might be some, but that was the end of my report, and we'll stand for questions.
Any questions? Councilor Cran?
I just have a quick question related to, some of our conversations, you really alluded to this, and it seems really complicated. And it seems in a lot of ways the perfect is the enemy of the good in this particular situation. I'm curious, do local level folks have the ability to interface with tracks? So for instance, if all of the jurisdictions in our MPO are using tracks, could we take the data at a different place? And is there an opportunity to potentially have other access points where people could analyze this in a more expeditious way?
Unfortunately, because you have personal identifying information, the state has statutes that said you can't release information. So there would be so many things redacted that if someone did allow you to get into their database, one, I think it would have to be for either a study or something like that. But usually it's agency to agency to be allowed to do that, and there's a lot of different parameters that you have to follow. But to allow just a private entity to get personal confidential information would violate a lot of the state statutes.
I guess I'm thinking more like in the city of Las Cruces, could we take the data from tracks and use that to make decisions? Or, if we're talking about something along the I-25 corridor, us and DPS, those two things, and it seems like it would be aggregated and not sort of like you mentioned, the different types of data. This is not the kind of data that's like, where did those people go? Did they, the people actually don't matter. In a lot of the conversations that we have, it matters more about the engineering and the design and locations. So it feels like it just feels like we could have a workaround in that way.
So
I wish we could.
Mr. Chair and council member, so TRAX isn't a public domain item, it's a law enforcement tool. So, law enforcement, when they're writing their crash reports, if they're doing it by hand, a lot of times it is there's a carbon copy or something, or they photocopy it. So you could go to your local agency and say, hey, I'd like to get as many crash reports as I can get, and they could release it to you. But really, it's the DOT is tasked with putting it in an aggregate data. So when we tell you the number of crashes at a time of day, we're taking the information from the crash report and putting it in a usable format statewide. We do have it broken down by county, we do have it broken down by city, and we do some of those community reports. And so we do have the community report information, and we can get you the link for those community reports, and you can see some of that. And we do get questions like, hey, I want to know how many crashes there were on my street. But we get thousands of those requests. A new business wants to open up, and they say, well, you have to do a traffic study, and Trent would say, yeah, well, we do a lot of different things for the traffic study, the impact, but also we want to see the number of crashes. Is a new driveway going to cause different crashes? So it is really our task to put it in that aggregate form. So I'm not saying I don't want to give it to you. I'm just saying there's not a process to give it to an entity. The track system isn't a public domain.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Councilor. We'll go Mayor Barraza, and then we'll do Councilor Bencomo.
Okay. Thank you so much for that presentation. Very informative. And I was texting our marshal from the town of Mesilla to see if we are using tracks. And he said half of the units are, not the other half are not. But he is saying also that they have another huge issue is the uploading of files into the server. And so are you working with the different entities to resolve those issues, those problems? Or is there an issue at the hub of it all?
So like I said, we rely on law enforcement, and a lot of times they're not, all the officers aren't 100% geared up with all the tracks, because like I said, that's probably their traffic unit that has the tracks. They're the ones writing the majority of the citations. So they're like, look, we don't need to give our homicide investigators the track system because they're not usually dealing with traffic. So that's one thing we appreciate law enforcement saying, look, I'm not asking for 100% of my agency officers to have it. I just need these guys to have it. And then we work with that system, with those entities. But like I said, the issue is they could be on the side of the road and they could try to submit it, and it goes to their local RMS system, the records management system. A lot of these local entities have their own records management system within their own entity. So that's the area that, like I said, the web connectivity, that they're not. So it doesn't download until they get closer to their RMS or closer to an area that has the cell phone service, really. So those are things that we're, unfortunately, unless we work on getting more cell phone towers, but there's different things that, within DOT, we are working on, broadband and things like that statewide. And we've been tasked with some broadband things that we could hopefully eventually build into it, and that could eliminate a lot of the missing data points that people can't access.
Thank you, Mayor Barraza. Councilman Como?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, I have lots of questions. I don't know if I'm going to get them all out or if any of them are going to make sense. This was really informative. Thank you very much. So maybe these will just be, I'll be repeating some questions just for my understanding. So right now, you don't currently have like a streamlined process for receiving reports. They just come in sort of whenever, maybe from agencies, maybe once a year, more than a year. There's no like state law that says this is when you need to provide crash reports.
Mr. Chair and council member, I did put the statute up there, and it says that within a certain period of time, 24 hours within their investigation completion, it should be submitted to the DOT. So there's no penalty if they don't, but the term completion of your investigation, if it was a DWI, there's a lot of, it's got to go to court, it's got to go to a lot of things. So a lot of times they're saying, well, we want to wait till we get everything in there. We want to wait to see, well, wait a minute, there was a crash and one person was taken to the hospital, but if we send it too soon, we're going to have to amend it because that person died. So now we had 2 fatalities, and it looks like they, so there's things that maybe cause that delay, and maybe there's a he said, she said. No, he pulled out, and so there's what they call them crash reconstructionists. For some of these big crashes, they might come out and say, look, I got to figure out who was at fault here because I can't tell. Neither person was available to tell me, and this was a huge crash. So completion of your investigation is the term which gives the law enforcement time. And like I said, they're pulled in a lot of different directions. And like I said, we don't know. That was a pretty horrific crash, and they send it in 24 hours, and then there's a lot of things that come out later. So they don't want to have to amend it. And so we don't want to be constantly amending them. We'd rather get a complete report. So I think that leads to some of it. Unfortunately, there's agencies that, hey, they forget, hey, I thought you were in charge of sending those in. No, that was the captain, but he retired. So it's just a matter of reminding them, hey, can we get someone it could be a clerk, it could be someone like, hey, take that box and mail it. Believe me, we get boxes mailed to us. We get, we have hundreds of boxes that we have to maintain for potential IPRAs. So we do have a lot of data, but the getting the majority of those electronically from state police, from the larger agencies, has helped. So like I said, if there's no connectivity issues and they upload it right away, we get that, and it's a lot cleaner. Like I said, the barcode helps with those handwriting issues, misspelling issues, and so those kind of things help. And the more we can get towards that, the better our data will be.
Okay, thank you. Can you go back to the $500 threshold and explain that again? I wasn't sure I understood what you were saying.
So for every, if there's a motor vehicle crash on the state road, then it generates the uniform crash report. If there's a property damage report, and so someone runs into a pole, a light pole, and they want an insurance claim, well, if the cost to replace their bumper is more than $500, then that generates the uniform crash report. But if it's less than $400, any crash involving property damage at that less than $500, hey, my windshield got cracked. A windshield costs $150 unless you have all the different high-tech, systems now. My windshield, on my truck, $150. There's no need for a windshield report of $150. We would throw that out. If someone said, hey, someone threw a can out of their car, it hit my window, and I filed a report, it's $150. We don't need to maintain that report pursuant to statute. There's a $500 threshold. So that's the other thing is estimated value of, and say they put, it's going to be $800, we would have to maintain that report.
And you said you had done some advocacy with the state legislature to move that up to 1,000?
Yeah, we've been working at, when we're submitting our legislative package from the DOT, we would say, you know what, it would make more sense because $500, maybe that's how much a bumper used to cost, but there's no $500 bumpers now. You can go to junkyard and get one, but you still have to paint it, and it's going to still cost you a couple thousand. So.
Okay. Thank you. You said the LCPD is using the track system. Do you know off the top of your head if there's been any reported issues, anything we can do to better support traffic enforcement officers in using the system?
So what I will tell you is we have what's called our Traffic Records Coordinating Committee. When we're trying to build this system, we didn't want to just say, hey, DOT, we know what we want to do. This is how we want to get there. We said, we need law enforcement to tell us what we need. We need the courts to tell us what they need. We need MVD to tell us. So we have a big group of individuals that we think can provide us. We need our Department of Information Technology. Any other partners that we think we should have on that Traffic Records Coordinating Committee. And I will tell you, Doña Ana and Las Cruces were some of the first advocates and first users of our track system. So they saw the value in it. They have enough officers that are biggest advocates for it. And a lot of times they're on that coordinating committee and some of the most, vocal supporters of that. So, we need them to champion and like, hey, can you go talk to this agency? They don't seem to be on board. They think it's a waste of money or they think it's a boondoggle. I don't know. For whatever reason, they don't like it. So they've been a lot of times a big advocate for us.
Okay, that's great to understand. And my last question really is around the conversation we've been having is, right, how frustrating and difficult it is to do better planning for within our MPO because of this 2-year lag in data. And through this presentation, I can see, why that's so complicated. And I guess I'm still unclear about why it's 2 years as opposed to, trying to get data a lot quicker to municipalities for better planning, for less injuries, for less fatalities. And honestly, I think this is present for me because in Las Cruces, we've had a significant amount of pedestrian and cycling fatalities, and that's not okay with me. And so, I'm just curious to hear from you, your takes on that, because we assumed that it was a state legislature problem. But through this presentation, I may be gathering that it's perhaps not.
It seems to be a process problem about, Mr. Chairman and council member. Like I said, there's a lot of factors that go into why we can't just take the report and release the information. There's missing information that goes back and forth and we have to get. So, human error, and even our error, we could have entered the wrong data. The federal government and our FAR system, the fatal analysis, they would prefer to get the information clean rather than us saying there was a fatality, we're going to let you know about it, and then here it is. And later on, we have to amend that because 2 people died after the person went to the hospital. So things like that, like I said, that long-term investigation of that crash, DWI crashes take a while to prosecute, to write the citations, to deal with all that. Officer has to have court time, things like that. But it's the cleaning of the data that takes the longest amount of time. But the federal government knows there are investigations that go on that takes a while to be completed. So one crash might take 3 months to get that report in. So I have a sample here of a crash report that we just printed up, and it'll tell you fatalities by month. It'll tell you whether it was a car, pickup truck, semi, a van, ATV, a motorcycle, pedestrian, the vehicle type unknown, the total number of fatalities, was there alcohol involved, but rural or urban, was it seatbelt related, were they wearing a seatbelt, motorcycle, were they wearing a helmet, was it senior or 65 plus? So that's the aggregate data that I'm talking about that we have to get and extrapolate from the reports. And so it takes us a while to extrapolate that. And then sometimes people are like, well, tell me how many pedestrian crashes there were. So we just have to focus just on the pedestrian portion of that. We have it broken down by counties related to alcohol use, belt use, under 21, fatalities by maintenance district. Maybe there's some guardrail that we might need to put up or median cable barriers that could help us with some rollovers. And so there's a lot of different wants. Motorcycle advocates want to know, hey, how many T-bone crashes were there where someone cut in front of my motorcycle? And so we have to try to pull out that data. We can't just say it was a motorcycle crash. They want to know who was at fault, things like that. So we have to try to find that. Then break down, well, what's the biggest percentage of crashes? Motor vehicle crashes, 40% alcohol related, things like that we need to try to advocate for. Besides the traffic data process and traffic data program, Mr. Chairman, members of the council, we also fund overtime enforcement for law enforcement. We also fund training for law enforcement. We also fund checkpoint, seatbelt support. So our traffic safety program, we also have a pedestrian program. We oversee the driver education program. We oversee the DWI school program, the driver safety programs, the ignition interlock program. So there's a whole lot of ways that we're trying to address crashes. The data is the starting point, though. So when we're creating our plans, we have to create a highway safety plan every year, and we have to look at our data, and we try to get the most current data we have, of course. But the feds know you can use up to 3 years of data because they want to see the 3 to 5 year trend. And so for the most part, you're looking for trends. Was it a spike for some reason? Oh, well, you know what? They redesigned the road. The crash in that area reduced. And that's the kind of thing that we're looking for is the trends. Is there something causing it to continually rise, or is it a spike and we can do something about that, Mr. Chair, members of the council?
I guess it's my understanding that the El Paso MPO receives data monthly?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, so I sit next to the TxDOT district engineer, and every Friday he gets some sort of summary. But I don't know if it's verified. I don't know if it's just counts. I just know that every Friday he's getting some sort of data, even COVID data, those kinds of things. I don't know what Franklin talked a little bit about their system in Texas. He just mentioned to me that every Friday, when I sit down next to him on Friday, he's like, hey, we had so many accidents this week or this month. But I don't know if they're going into the causes. I don't know if they're looking at patterns.
Right.
It is purely a count.
Number, right. And I guess I just was going to ask if you're familiar with that, and then if those are sort of smaller, shorter term pieces that could be implemented to just get some sort of raw data even, right? Not full, because the presentations that we get on that are incredible, right? Like they're very thorough and they're very good. And I'm just wondering how more quickly our planning departments, Public Works, whoever can get some of that data?
So, Mr. Chair and council members, we can run a fatality report on a regular basis because, like I said, we get the early notification, and then the fatalities definitely prompt that. In the state police, law enforcement agencies, we are like, hey, there's a fatality. Hey, I need to call. I need to get that report. I need to get the information, and we know the fatality, so we can put it in that checkbox. So the fatality data we can get on a regular basis. The one thing that our traffic record staff will put in big red giant font letters is preliminary. Because like I said, maybe we didn't get all the fatal crash reports, and we told you there was 7 fatals this month, and then 2 months later you say, wait a minute, this updated report says there was 14. How did you miss 7? How'd you say 7? In a sense, it looks like we're misleading the public. So we would rather wait until we know we got all the data all the reports that we have. So Texas, if you look at that, I'm sure it says preliminary, and they will stress preliminary because there are reports, Mr. Chair and council members, that maybe haven't been submitted yet. DWI cases, for instance, if it has to go to the state lab for toxicology reports, those take 8 months to get the toxicology reports processed and sent back to us. So, if someone wants to know how many drug driving crashes there were this year, we could say preliminary numbers, we have 100. But by the end of the year, that number might be up to 150 once we get the toxicology reports back. So we're careful about putting that number out, which could potentially look like we're misleading the public. Oh, last year, at this time last year, there was 3 crashes and there were none this year. And then a month later, it's back up to the 3 fatal crashes. It's like, well, wait a minute.
Right.
What happened? We'd have to go back and say, well, the agency got to us at the end of the month. When you asked me for it, it was January 1st. By the 30th, I got the reports. So that preliminary data is probably what Texas is providing. So we have to be careful. And I think we are careful with that. Whenever we do a press release right now, last year, there were this many crashes. To date, we have 150 preliminary. And then when we do get asked, well, like you said, 150, it's 175. Well, that's because we were waiting for, so that's always our response is we were waiting without putting the law enforcement. Like I said, they have reasons why it takes a while to get that report completed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Benko. I think you hit on, I think everything you've said still goes, I don't get how we get to 2 years because we've said toxicology reports take 8 months. Sometimes they wait till the end of the law enforcement agencies wait till the end of the year. But it seems like, I think as Councilor Karen had mentioned, there's got to be, I would think there's a way that you just mentioned preliminary reports. And I know there's been several things that were raised. One was access to certain information. 2 was making sure that it's accurate information. And so it seems like even if we had like 80–90% of the data, we would have a pretty good idea of a trend that we're seeing. Because right now, like you had mentioned, if there were improvements put on, you talked about guardrails, you talked about maybe other things that were improvements that were made. We won't see that data for 2 years. And there's no way for us to extrapolate that unless we specifically go to our local law enforcement agencies and have somebody within our local group or governments look at that. And I think that's where I think, if I were to ask you, is the data, I guess, is the issue of timing specifically around reporting from local law enforcement agencies to Nmdot, or is there something else that would cause the delay? And just in general, I know there's specific reasons, but if I was looking at one thing that we could do as a body and try to ask our state leaders to help us go fix, or help you go fix to get the data, what would it be?
So, Mr. Chair and members of the council, like I said, automation would help 100%. And getting to the mayors, Mr. Chairman and council members, the problem with, well, we're using tracks, but they don't send it until I'm closer in or until I get my Wi-Fi is, working. So things across the board, I think the broadband, expansion, which DOT is working on to try to make those connections where needed to help improve that statewide access to Wi-Fi and to that is helpful so that we are moving in that direction. Like I said, funding source, do we have a funding source that we could help agencies get on board with this?
And what would the cost, what does it cost for an agency to get on to tracks?
Like Mr. Chairman and member of the council, like I said, the in unit would be about $1,200 per unit. But there's also some other infrastructure that have to be built. Do they have to have their own RMS, records management system locally? So, because they want to get the information. If you go to your local Las Cruces PD and say, hey, I got in a crash, I'd like to get that police report, they don't come to us. They have their own records management system. So any automation of those record management systems would be beneficial. So, they still have some people that, have a clerk that takes the handwritten reports and puts them in a manila folder and puts it in a cabinet. And so, automation, of course, would be helpful, but then finding that funding source for that automation. And so, but like I said, I'm not here. I mean, if you ask law enforcement, hey, why does it take so long to get my police report? I just got in the crash. They're not turning it around in one day. They want to get the proper information, get it entered, get it in their system so that anyone else who wants that report could come get it. So, so there's processes within the municipalities. Like I said, we're the state. They're supposed to send it all to us within 24 hours. Are we get it within 24 hours? No.
Yeah, but then there's no penalty or any reason. There's nothing that requires them. It's just a guideline is what the statute basically says. Like you said, there's no penalty for them to not meet that guideline. And then the interpretation is within 24 hours of the completion of the investigation. So that gives them a lot of leeway. I think when we've had the presentations, and I know you mentioned wanting to have accuracy, but I don't think we've ever had a review or any of the data that's ever presented to us that has ever, I know, like I said, for law enforcement, and I think for the court system and so on. Sorry, and I point here just because I'm pointing at the presentation. So I'm not pointing to the counselor, so I apologize. But I think for us, when we're looking, I think for us as leaders within the community here, I think we just need high level information. If we're seeing crashes, is it, like you had mentioned, is it an SUV? Is it a motorcycle? Is it a bicycle, pedestrian? I think from a high level, that's the type of information that would help us be able to make decisions quicker. I don't know, Andrew, I apologize if I'm speaking out of turn here or something where, and you can correct me if I'm.
No, Mr. Chair, I do have some questions, but I want to wait until after you have finished your dialogue, so. Yeah,
so I guess where I'm going is there any way for us to be able to get at least I know you said it's preliminary data. And I know and just speaking, I'm a mechanical engineer, so when it comes to computer systems, I'm not by any means an expert, but I know when we look at different databases and have accesses to it, depending on the access that we have, we're allowed to see specific information. So if the courts might need names and of people involved in an accident or an event, but say the municipality does not, is there any way for us to be able to get that preliminary data, even if it's like 3 to 6 months behind? Because even like if you look 3 to 6 months, that's a huge improvement over 2 years.
So, Mr. Chair and members of the council, we're always looking for process improvements. Could we put more funding towards it? Yes, if we had the funding. So we utilize federal funding, and it's specific for traffic records programs. And so is there some other state money we could supplement that? Is there a revenue source that we could get? Absolutely. Absolutely. That would help us get there. But like I mentioned, there are privacy issues. The courts said, hey, fine, release that crash report. we still have the driver's name, driver's date of birth, driver's address, things like that, that we still have to clean. And so we get IPRA requests all the time for a crash report, and then we have to go through our legal process to say what is eligible to be released. So, I mean, 2 years seems like it's we're closer to like a year and a half, I would say, but it just depends. Is it the federal fiscal year? Is it the calendar year? Is it the state fiscal year? So there's different slides of when that data is requested. The feds, I believe, are looking at their their calendar year. So when we go to the legislature, everyone wants to know it by fiscal year. So we're having to change what reports we're giving so we have to be careful. There were 149 DWI fatalities last year in the calendar year. And then when we go to the legislature, they want to know from July 1 to June 30th, and then the number is 149. They're like, why is that number changed? Well, because we slid the bar. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the council.
And I think one example, right, I think, would be for, like, whenever we have something like on a state highway here in the county. And I know we'd recently discussed this, where there was an accident in the southern part of the county where the vehicle had taken out the control box for the lighting in an area. And we're seeing an increase in accidents. And it's anecdotal because we know we're getting reports or we're hearing about it from, say, our deputies. But how is it if it's on a state highway that I can then go, if it's within the municipality or the county, we can work together to get something fixed. But if I was going to go to, say, Trent and being like, hey, I'm having this issue where we're having more accidents, how do I give him the information, or how do I push him so then he can go to Santa Fe and say, hey, we need to expedite this? Because I think if there's no data to back that up, because we're still waiting on data, how do we as municipalities be able to go and advocate to a state agency like the DOT to help us here locally?
So, Mr. Chairman and members of the council, like I said, we are compiling this data for the entire state. Working with your local municipalities is probably the best way to get that local data. Like I said, they would have the most current data for their city, for their county, or the local state police district here would have more timely data. They're required to submit it to us on for the yearly review, but there is options to work with your local municipality, because to put it all on the DOT, we want DOT to give us Doña Ana's most timely data when I don't have Doña Ana's most timely data. And like I said, I'm not here to disparage law enforcement. They have reasons why it takes a while to get that report to us. But if there was a report written, someone has a process. If they have a records management system internally, there's a possibility that you could get it there faster.
Okay. All right. Mayor Barraza.
So, Mr. Garcia, thank you so much, and Mr. Chair, for your comments. I know some of us have to leave by 3, so I'm not sure how much we're going to get done. But I understand exactly what you're saying, Mr. Garcia, because we're a small municipality. I have one officer on duty, and if he's tied up at the end of his duty, he's not going to come back till later to do his report. And then if he needs additional information, it might take a while, as you just mentioned. And in one of your slides, you did say there was only 53 or 58% of communities that are on tracks, correct? So then that leaves you at more than half that are not, because I know we have about 110 established municipalities in the state of New Mexico. And if only half are using tracks, there's no way, unless they're sending in the handwritten stuff or however other way they're sending the information. So I, as a small municipality, understand exactly what you're saying. We don't have the manpower like the county or the city that can compile all this information. We have a marshal and a lieutenant that end up doing reports if they're not out on duty patrolling. And so it's kind of a time factor as to when the reports are being sent in. So I truly understand when you're saying, 2 years back, because our constituents or even agencies, when you give them that information, they're holding you to the gospel truth on that. And when you end up having to change the numbers, then they're irate because you're no longer giving them that accurate information. Now the information you gave them was false. And so it comes back to the administrators or the municipalities saying you gave us inaccurate information. So I understand exactly where you're coming from and saying that your data is 2 years behind. I know we would like to see it on a more timely basis, but I understand all the factors going into as to why you do not. As a small municipality, I can attest to that, and I truly understand. And I think you're correct in saying that the different agencies, like the city or the county, probably have more resource to gather the data that they want to be able to put that in their plans or however they're trying to utilize that data from. So thank you so much.
Mr. Chair and council members and mayor, thank you for that. I appreciate the dialogue. And one thing I failed to mention, when we give that final report and we say this is the final report for 2021, we have to inform our federal partners and say we are 100% comfortable that this is the number for the end of the year. We're not going to provide any more changes. We feel we have all the items and we are confident in this number. And that's the thing is, like you said, we want to have the confidence that the number we put out there as the final information, not preliminary. Once we take that preliminary off, then we are tied to that number, tied to all the data that's in that system. So, thank you.
Mr. Chair? Sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Dula.
I'll be brief. I know time is of an issue. So I'm kind of on the fence with this discussion because as an engineer, it's important to know the reason behind the accidents. For us to implement any kind of improvement, we could increase liability to us if we implement something and that's not the reason for the accident. So I understand completely Franklin's comment that we need to be careful on how we're using the data, how we're submitting that data. But the flip side of that is I like the idea of getting numbers quicker, just general numbers, only because right now we're in the process of 2 projects that are very specifically safety driven, University I-25 and then the New Mexico 404 corridor. And so if there's a way that I can show, especially like at I-25 and University, that we're saving, accidents for our kids, those kinds of things, I think that reflects well on us in department when we're planning those things. But your comment related to the box in the controller cabinet in Chaparral, I don't know what the reasons are for those accidents. I don't know if it's DWI. I don't know if it's driving too fast. I don't know if it's because they can't see. And so if we go in and we start implementing something just based on numbers, it increases liability to us as a department. So I think we need to be careful what data we're asking and how we're using it. But I would like nothing more than to use just general crash data to say, hey, man, our planning is working. Our projects are working. We're saving lives. And I don't know how we get that data, Franklin. I can tell you I've been with the department 24 years, and I've just kind of accepted that I didn't know the process. I didn't know how it worked. I feel sorry for you guys. I can't imagine having to deal with that kind of paperwork. But I appreciate the presentation, but I just caution us as not only community leaders, but as engineers and how we're using this data. We need to be careful or we open ourselves to additional liability.
Well, and thank you for that, Mr. Doolittle. I think what we're getting at is, and I understand, if we're making like a huge change or a multi-million-dollar decision and basing it off preliminary data that might not be complete, I agree that there would have to be some caution taken. But in a case like this, like I said, the controller, if we're seeing an increase in crashes and you can see that the lights were out, that I don't know would increase liability. I don't see how something like that would increase liability by simply replacing something that was existing infrastructure there. But if you had to expedite it because all of a sudden, in the same time, like in the first quarter of 2022, while this was out, we saw a 200% increase in crashes regardless of the reason. versus 2021 or 2020, I would think that would show us that maybe we should try to, do something or bring attention to it. I mean, like I said, I understand what you're saying because you're trying to find that line, and I completely agree. I don't think we need to make huge policy decisions with preliminary data. And I agree that, like Mr. Garcia is saying, that we want to make sure we have the most accurate, the reasons, because if you try to implement a huge traffic pattern change or something based off of faulty data, then we could create a whole nother issue. So I understand your point. I just think like it'd be great to be able to see that preliminary data, especially for small issues like where you're trying to, do we need to expedite this or that? How do we get some more resources here and there? But it's a double-edged sword, I guess, of having that information. Councilor Bencomo, sorry.
I also just wanted to say one last thing, because certainly I also really appreciate the dialogue, and it's not every day we get to have you in front of us as policymakers. And so, forgive me if I do sound frustrated. I do wonder if, other MPOs have raised this issue. And if they haven't, this MPO certainly is raising this issue. And so where do we find a balance? Because, through your presentation, quite frankly and honestly, one of the biggest takeaway I took is that the biggest barrier you have is delays from law enforcement and reporting. And to me, that is a problem. And I feel like there is also a conversation we should have about accountability, about what it means to be responsible with reporting data, because at the end of the day, crashes and planning around them is important. It is saving lives. It is saving people from injuries and thousands of dollars of debt, medical debt or whatever, right? It is about our constituents and their safety. And that's why I think I'm certainly not trying to disrespect your work and how hard this is. Like, you have explained very complicated process, but I want to at least voice my concerns as well, since we are policymakers and we have you here in front of us.
Mr. Chair and council members, one of the other items that you guys are talking about doing some immediate remediation for a crash issue. What I'll tell you is, working with the district engineers, working with our traffic engineers, working with even our traffic safety division, where do we put our enforcement funding? Where do we, see where our high number of DWIs are, where our speed-related crashes are, things like that. We don't just take a month of data. We take a 3 to 5 year graph and say, hey, we see a trend here. We see this. So, for our planning purposes within the DOT, I think if Trent is going to redo a road, he doesn't decide on a Monday and then say, I'm going to do it on Friday. He says, why do I need to fix this road? Well, because the traffic volumes are increasing, because the crashes are increasing. And how does he know that? Because he looked at the historical data. So I think, we do provide that historical data. We can show you all the crashes going back to 1980. How many DWI fatalities they were, how many non-DWI fatalities were, going all the way back to the data we've been collecting since then. We can show you all the bar graphs of all those years. So you could look for those trends over that 3 to 5 year period. And when we do our highway safety plan for all of our safety programs, NHTSA says, are you using a 3 year graph or a 3 year window or a 5 year? And we get to decide which would give us the better picture of where our problems are. The 5 year window or 3 year, that way we're catching the spikes a little better rather than a linear graph. So like I said, it might be a 2 year lag, but you could look at the preliminary data for fatalities, but also look at all the full year data and say, hey, this is why we need to change this, because we have enough reasoning, because the crashes have been going up. We can see the numbers going up over the past 5 years.
Thank you. Andrew, you said you had a couple.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I have quite a lot of things that I actually want to discuss, but unfortunately, in view of the time, we have less than half an hour before we're going to lose quorum. I would like to respectfully request that the policy board consider postponing the safety resolution until the next meeting. Just briefly, because we do have hard state deadlines with regards to project submissions and things that our member jurisdictions urgently want to get before the state for the TPF and the TIP. And we don't have another opportunity other than today, so it needs to be done. But just high level, I think that if Iowa is the gold standard, we should find out how fast they're able to get things back and then aim for that. I don't think it's necessary or acceptable for New Mexico to just settle for how it's always been, just cause. I do think that there is a lot of scope actually for legislative, I'll use the word intervention here, because I think it sounds like one of the best things that we could possibly do is get Mr. Garcia's section of Nmdot far better resourced. And he made the comment that DOT can't enforce tracks usage. Well, state legislature can. So there are a lot of things that I think actually could be done to, and I mean, the legislature also controls the purse strings. So with that, Mr. Chair, we've got less than half an hour, so we may want to wrap up this dialogue, postpone the safety resolution so that we can go ahead and move on to the TIP and to the TPF applications. I will collaborate with Mr. Garcia between now and the next meeting, and keep yourself and Mr. Doolittle as well in the loop of the conversations.
Great. No, I appreciate it. Mr. Garcia, thank you so much. I know there's a lot of questions, and I think this has been something that we've been discussing here as on this board for, since I've been on the last few years. So, so I think there's just so much we want to learn and understand and really try to figure out, I think, as Andrew noted, what is it that we can do? Because I think here within this MPO, we're trying to figure out how do we get the most accurate data as quickly as we can so that we can best make the decisions within our jurisdictions for the citizens that we serve. So thank you so much for coming and really appreciate your presentation and informing us today.
Okay, Mr. Chairman and members of the council, appreciate it.
Mr. Doolittle?
Just one quick comment. So I do also have some questions related to the resolution that I didn't bring up just because this is a discussion topic related to the presentation. But one, I did get a copy of the presentation when it was submitted to Andrew. My recommendation, Andrew, if there's a way that can be shared with the board. I think
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Doolittle, yeah, we were absolutely going to share the presentation, Mr. Garcia's presentation with the board, hopefully this afternoon, if we're able. But yeah, we're definitely going to share it.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if we're going to postpone that action item, but if we don't, I do have some comments related to the resolution.
I think that was gonna be the next thing, was I was gonna ask if we were gonna move on to agenda item 7.2. I was gonna ask for a motion to table this to June 8th.
I
which is our next
recommend, I move we table this to a date certain, June 8th, the June meeting, please.
Thank you, Counselor. We have a motion. Do we have a second to table?
Second.
Seconded by Counselor Bencomo. Okay. If there's no other discussion at this point, would we be able to get a roll call on the motion to table to a date certain, which will be June 8th, our next MPO meeting?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Ellens?
Yes.
Councilor Corrin?
Yes.
Councilor Bencomo?
Yes.
Mayor Barraza?
Yes.
Mr. Doolittle?
Yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
All right. Apologies, Mr. Chair. The motion passes.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, then we'll move on to agenda item 7.3, which is resolution 22-05, a resolution amending for fiscal year 2022 to 2027 Transportation Improvement Program.
I would like to introduce Mr. Dominic Loya.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Policy Board. So today, Dominic Loya for MPO staff. Today we will be looking at a few TIP amendments for the Transportation Improvement Program. So there are a couple from Nmdot and there'll be a few from Roadrunner Transit. So the first one is LC 00470. It's for federal fiscal year 2022. And it's for pavement preservation along US 70. It's based specifically for 37 miles of US 70. It's $3.3 million, moving $3.3 million from federal fiscal year 2023 to this federal fiscal year 2022. And this will affect the performance measures to state of good repair. We have LC 00440 for federal fiscal year 2026. So this is in the out years of the TIP. It is also for the pavement preservation along US 70. It is a $5 million increase due to rising costs of goods right now. This will also help improve performance measure 2, state of good repair. And then we now have a few from Roadrunner Transit. And this is TL00120. This is for capital equipment. It's a new shop truck, and they were reducing funding from $62,500 to $50,000. And this will not have any effect on performance measures. We then have for Roadrunner Transit for federal fiscal years 2022 to 2027, TL00110. And this is for rolling stock from the 5303 funds. There's no rolling stock budgeted for this year, so that will be reducing 2022 to zero, and then increasing 2023 to 2027 for the funding of the 5307 funds due to the increases that they receive from FTA. This will not have any performance measure effects. We have Roadrunner Transit for 5339 funds. This is also for rolling stock. And this will be to amend to adjust for the funding formula and an increase from $184,000 to $708 to $264,850, and it will for next year, and it will not have any effect on the performance measures. We have TL00150. This is for software updates for 2022. It's for additional software, and it'll be an increase from $281,404 to $397,200. Again, it will not have any effect on the performance measures. Then we have TL00100 for federal fiscal year 2022. This is the operating section. This will lower the amount of FTA 5307 funds from $1,211,854 to $1,045,411. It will add in a new funding category for small transit-intensive cities at $400,000 per year from federal fiscal year 2022 to 2027. And then it will also end in stuff from the American Recovery Act and the grant at $6.4 million. And it does not have any effect on performance measures. And then we have TL00130 for federal fiscal year 2022. This is for the Maintenance and Operations Center. And it'll increase budget based on the recently announced federal fiscal year 2022 5307 and 5339 formula apportionments. It will increase from $2 million to $6.8 million. And it does not have any effect on the performance measures. The BPAC recommended approval at their April 19th meeting. The TAC recommended approval last week at their May 5th meeting. We are seeking approval for this series of TIP amendments from the policy board. I will now stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Loya. Are there any questions regarding the amendments to the TIP? Okay. I'm not hearing anything, so I'll ask for a motion and a second to approve the amendment.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. All right, we have a motion by Councilor Coran, seconded by Councilor Bencomo. If there's no other comments at this time, then we'll ask for a roll call, please.
Commissioner Ellens,
Yes.
Councilor Coran,
Yes.
Councilor Bencomo,
Yes.
Mayor Barraza,
Yes.
Mr. Doolittle,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Resolution 22-05 is approved. All right, we're on to agenda item 7.4, which is resolution 22-06, a resolution approving an out-of-cycle amendment to the 2022-2027 TIP.
And Mr. Chair, this will be for the Elks Drive Multi-Use Trail, LC 00390. And this is an out-of-cycle amendment because it was it did not happen for BPAC. So presenting it will be Miss Valerie Sherman for Doña Ana County.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the Policy Board. I'm Valerie Sherman. I'm Planner Designer with Doña Ana County. The county has requested additional construction funding for the project, number LC 00390 for the Elks Drive Multi-Use Trail. The original contract for the multi-use trail was completed in 2018, and since that time, increasing inflation, especially over the last year, has caused construction prices to increase by 30 to 40%. So the county requested a total amount of $638,322 and committed to providing a match of $108,777. Total funding shortfall is $747,100. And so that is what you will be voting on today. And that concludes my short presentation, and I will stand for any questions.
Are there any questions from it? Yes, Mr. Doolittle.
Just a quick question. I noticed in the packet, under that agenda item, it has the agency as Nmdot, Elks Drive Columbia Elementary. Is that because the funding's coming through us, or should it actually be Doñana County?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Doolittle, yes, that is because the funding is coming from Nmdot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Doolittle. Are there any other questions for Ms. Sherman? All right. Would I be able to get a motion and a second on Resolution 22-06?
I move we approve 22-06.
Thank you, Counselor.
Mayor Barraza, second.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a motion and a second. Is there any last-minute input, questions? Hearing, seeing none. Can we get a roll call, please?
Commissioner Allens,
Yes.
Councilor Corn,
Yes.
Councilor Bencoma,
Yes.
Mayor Barraza,
Yes.
Mr. Doolittle,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right. We're on to, let's see, 7.5, which is Resolution 22-07, a resolution approving the submission of the 2022 Transportation Project Fund applications.
So, Mr. Chair, there will be three presentations, one by the town of Mesilla, one by the city of Las Cruces, and one by Doñana County. The first one will be Mr. Rod McGillivray for the town of Mesilla.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Chair, Policy Board. Members, Rod McGillivray, Public Works Director for the town of Mesilla. I've been requested to race through this. So this is the town of Messilla's Nmdot 2023 TPF call for projects. Our projects, Caide Santiago Bridge Improvement and Active Transportation Corridor Project. Purpose of the projects to provide an active transportation corridor by utilizing and, by upgrading and utilizing the existing sidewalk system from NM28, Avenida de Mesilla here through the core of Mesilla. I have this map on multiple slides. Project will provide safe access and connectivity from NM28 to the Mesilla Plaza, churches, businesses, community center, and the post office. This project also, it adjoins another project that we currently have going on at the plaza, which is a ADA improvement project. And this project also joins the Caide Picacho sidewalk replacement and roadway replacement project at the top of the map there, which are already funded projects that we have. This just a couple slides showing the complexities and difficulties of navigating through Mesilla. You can see that this is Caide Santiago looking west at San Albino. Irregular surfaces, large steps, if you would. That top picture is a picture of a ramp right in front of the church. So this project will add accessible ramps and remove and replace sidewalks. Currently, there's not a safe connectable route from Avenida de Mesilla into the core of Mesilla or into town without requiring the street to be used for access. So the real drive of this project is to be able to get somebody off the bus from the public right-of-way into the town, into these businesses, and actually all the way to the community center so they can get to the church, they can get to the plaza. And right now there isn't any good route at all for anybody to get into these areas from the bus. This project also includes a bridge replacement, Calle de Santiago and the Mesilla lateral. The bridge is considered unsafe, can't be altered to accommodate the new sidewalks. This is a shot of the bridge. This is the cross-section of the bridge showing sidewalks on both sides. The current structure there just doesn't have the width, and it's outlived its useful life. A couple other pictures of it. This project will also include construction of new sidewalks and the replacement of minor pavement section at the and curb and gutter. So that's the community center park. So this project goes all the way to Calle de Picacho, where you see the large hashed area right there. This mouse isn't working very well, but right here. That would be from the bridge back to Picacho would be new sidewalk. And then also all the way actually to here is new sidewalk. So from this point to Calle de Picacho currently, there isn't even a sidewalk. Total cost of the project's about $470,000. These projects are outside of the town's normal maintenance and operation funds, and basically without state funding opportunities, it's impossible for the town to get this done. Just a couple slides showing projects that we've already done out of our operation funds. These are not ADA ramps. These are just sloped walking surfaces, but you can see by these slides that the town's aggressively trying to improve the usability of the town. And again, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the presentation?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Allens?
unless state funds are allocated for this project, is it doable?
No. No.
Thank
I mean,
you.
the only other option would be some type of federal funds, but then we'd have to ask the state to help us with the match.
What's the likelihood of funds being allocated, either federal or state?
We think excellent. We think this program is a perfect program to fund this.
So you'll go after them in the next 60-day session, I assume?
No, sir. Commissioner Allens, so these are all applications being submitted to the Department of Transportation for a call of projects that they're looking to fund. So this is what I think what they're asking for is the approval from the MPO from each of these jurisdictions for submission to the Nmdot. Is that correct, Mr. Loya? I just want to make sure.
Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Yeah. So this is just going to be their application or the project they're requesting to or sending their application to the Nmdot. Okay. Are there any other questions?
It's not a question. Just want to say, good job, Rod, and I think the pictures kind of speak for themselves.
Thank you, Mayor Barraza. Thank you. All right.
Mr. Chair, next up, we will have the City of Las Cruces, and this will be Mr. Sugu Lee presenting.
Good afternoon. This is a project for traffic pedestrian safety study, analysis with our imaging process with our AIs at the signalized and unsignalized, and then also mid-block around the 130 location, and to evaluate any safety issue or any traffic operation issue. And our final report will include any potential or the viable mitigation measure with some estimate. Pretty much it's covered the entire city. And then we will have several, public input meeting and then also the stakeholder meeting to finalize the list before we hire the company. This is an example of how we can use the AI for the traffic analysis. Our estimate is about the 17 grand for each location, plus about $20,000 to prepare the RFP. And then we expect about $2.1 million from the DOT and about $100,000 from the city. And the total is a $2.23 million. I'll stand for a question.
Thank you. Councilor Bencomo?
Thank you. Just one quick question, Sue. Thank you. Why was the consultant so expensive? $20,000. That's high price for a consultant. What all took place for that to be such a high price tag?
It's not really high. This is about the average cost. We already contacted 2 companies, and then this is the average price. Because they're going to use, what they're going to do is that they're going to install the camera at the 170 location, then they're going to record the video, and then they're going to using the image process with the AI and deep learning software, and then analyze it. Then they're going to formulate all the information, then they're going to provide that information to the traffic engineer. Then traffic engineer will find any the potential issue and the mitigation, what is most viable. Then they're going to estimate what's the actual cost, and then also they're going to provide the priority list based on their actual result. So that's the reason it's not really expensive.
No, but you're talking about the whole program. I guess I was just talking about the contractor for the RFP.
Yes, ma'am.
All of that. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Sue. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Lee?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Allens?
could you go back to the intersection picture? Maybe one of the city councilors can tell me, but unless it's a generic intersection, where is it in Las Cruces?
It is a generic. We actually, I'm sorry, I actually put the chorus mark, but unfortunately it's disappeared. This is the example, the intersection show how we're going to use the AI technology. This is not the city.
Okay. I knew I was right.
But I guess to me, seeing how complicated it is, it reminds me of like 3 Crosses and Maine, for instance, like hypothetically in terms of complicated data points that need to be accounted for. So if I had to pretend it was one, that would probably be the one that I would.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Lee.
Thank you.
And finally, Mr. Chair, we will have Ms. Valerie Sherman for Doña Ana County.
The county is pleased to present our proposed TPF project, the Rio Grande Trail. And an objective of this project is to implement the actions and priority projects of adopted plans through the planning and design of a new approximately 5.5-mile segment of the Rio Grande Trail from the Picacho Avenue Bridge north to the Shalem Colony Trail Bridge. The new trail will be designed to connect to the existing La Llorona and Outfall Channel trails. The northern trailhead at Shalem Colony Trail Bridge is a future site of a Doña Ana County Park, as well as connection point and gateway to the Prehistoric Trackways National Monument. Of course, other objectives would be for recreational purposes and economic prosperity for the region. The proposed project will advance the state's initiative, New Mexico House Bill 563, to expand a 500-mile cross-state recreational trail, and the project is consistent with the goals, strategies, and actions as identified in several adopted plans, as you see on your screen. The project proposal is supported through various state, regional, and local planning initiatives and leverages previous pedestrian investments by expanding the network of multi-use trails connecting to the Rio Grande and surrounding recreational assets. The proposed trail will be within the United States International Boundary Water Commission right-of-way and is supported by the U.S. IBWC through the environmental assessment for the continued implementation of the river management plan for the Rio Grande Canalization Project. The requested funds for the Rio Grande Trail project are for planning and preliminary engineering design, and the total of the project is $1,338,212. That concludes my presentation, and I will now stand for any questions.
Are there any questions for Ms. Sherman? All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And those are the three presentations. So that concludes the presentations. Is that correct, Mr. Loya?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
All righty. So if I can, I don't know if there's any last questions before, if on these items. Not hearing anything. So if I can ask for a motion and a second for approval of Resolution 2207-07.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion, we approve Resolution 22-07.
All right, thank you, Mayor Barraza. That's a motion by the mayor. Can I get a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor McComo. All right. Mr. Loya, if you would call the roll, please.
Commissioner Allens,
Yes.
Councilor Corn,
Yes.
Councilor Bencomo,
Yes.
Mayor Barraza,
Yes.
Mr. Doolittle,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. I know, Andrew, I know it's 3 o'clock, so I don't know, we still had 8.2 and 8.3 in terms of presentations. I don't know how we want to handle those, or if,
Mr. Chair, we will need to go ahead and, what happens when we lose quorum is I can still give presentations, but I can no longer entertain questions. And we will still have to bring the UPWP for action to the policy board in June regardless. It can't be postponed. This was just sort of the introductory thing. So I can run through that and then we can postpone or I can just say, we'll talk about the evaluation next month. And I'm not going to be very long. I know that multiple people do need to leave at 3 though, so I leave it to your discretion.
I mean, if you want to go ahead and I guess we can do the presentation.
Okay,
And then
I will.
I know I'll have to leave here shortly, but,
I will run through it right quick. UPWP, it's the biennial document with the budget, the financial budget and staff hours budget. The one that we are about to consider at the June meeting will be the 2023-2024. It must be adopted next month. The one significant change is we are rearranging some of our work tasks to be in conformity with the some of the stated intentions of the federal government as far as specifically calling out multimodal safety. Nothing as far as what we're doing is changing, but it's just sort of a reshuffling. We're also going to be reworking some of our items to specifically cover what is going to become an annual call for project process that we will be undertaking, and so we wanted to specifically call that out as an item. We do have the federal fiscal year 2023 funding levels. Those are included in the UPWP draft, and that's the baseline for federal fiscal year 2024. It is approximately 12% increase compared to, actually I see there was an error in my slide. It's actually compared to federal fiscal year 2022. And again, we will bring this to the policy board at June 8th for adoption. I do want to note now for the record, because Ms. Baum is not here, we have lost quorum with the departure of Mayor Barraza, so I'm not able to entertain any questions at this time. So.
okay. Well, I will just let the board know that the policy board know that if there are any questions on this, they can reach out to you separately or talk to you after the meeting. All right. Thank you, Andrew.
We can, if you wish to, we can still, I will say, MPO evaluation sheet is in there. Please let me know your comments. We will have to have an action item to endorse this in order for it to be implemented within the city system. I probably would feel more comfortable actually being able to field questions, so I probably will bring this back as a discussion item again in June.
Yeah.
So.
And I think you had mentioned before, we have some time, given that
Yeah.
It already has occurred for this year.
Well, it actually hasn't, but at this point, let's just move forward as we are able, and we'll get it implemented when we can.
Okay.
We can have the Nmdot and board member and staff updates. We just won't be able to have any conversations or questions about it.
Okay. All right. Well, then, so we'll move on then to if, like I said, 8.3, we'll look at what's in the packet, but again, we'll reach out to you with any questions, and we'll look to see it on the next agenda item, the next meeting's agenda. Then we'll move on to 9.1, Nmdot update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really don't have much. Our two projects on I-10 and 404 and the paving preservation north of town on I-25 just continue a normal process. The other one that I know of is of interest to this board specifically is the I-25 study. We still don't have the public meetings actually scheduled, but as soon as we get those, all of that will be disseminated. But we still plan to have two separate meetings, one virtual and then one in person in Doniana. Outside of that, Mr. Chair, I don't have any updates. It's been pretty quiet on our end through this MPO, but I'll stand. Oh, no, I won't stand for any questions. I'm getting off easy today, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Hey, this is the way to do it then. I guess we're just don't have quorum. All right.
But then we'd never do anything.
All right, we'll move on to 9.2, board members' updates. I don't know if there's any comments by the board or updates from them. All right. Don't see anything, so 9.3, MPO staff updates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only thing that I have is that we have the bylaws subcommittee meeting scheduled for week after next. Staff is very much looking forward to getting this process moving forward. Very optimistic that we're going to have good things come from it. And I guess we're already kind of de facto adjourned, so I guess, Mr. Chair, you can proclaim us adjourned.
That's what I was going to say. If we don't have a quorum, I don't have to, I guess I can't ask for a motion or second to adjourn, so we'll call this meeting adjourned at 3:05 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.